At the family dinner, Dad said, "I'm proud of all my children's, except the loser sitting at the table." Everyone laughed. I stood up, placed a secret paper on the table, and said, "For you. Dad, happy Father's Day." Then I walked outside, took back the luxury car I gave him, and moments later he screamed when he finally opened it. I'm Melissa. I'm 32 years old, a senior software engineer, and someone you might call successful on paper. I've worked hard to get where I am, late nights, missed holidays, skipped vacations, all for the chance to build something of my own and prove I was worth something. But to my father, I've always been the disappointment, not in an obvious dramatic way. He never yelled, never told me outright I was a failure. It was more subtle than that. It was the way his eyes lit up when Jake walked into the room, the way his voice lifted when Rachel brought her kids around. With me, it was always quiet, always neutral, like I was just there. I used to convince myself I was overthinking it, that I was sensitive or maybe just too hungry for approval. I used to tell myself that he was tough on me because he believed in me. But after this past reunion, I can't pretend anymore. This wasn't tough love. It was rejection dressed up in silence. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those big family gatherings that happen once or twice a year. Everyone was there, siblings, cousins, old aunts I barely remembered. The house smelled like roast chicken and cinnamon pie. The kitchen buzzed with laughter, and the dining room table was packed with food and people. I'd brought a bottle of wine, something nice. No one noticed. Dinner started like it always does, with my dad standing up to make a toast. He raised his glass and suddenly the room went quiet. That's when it happened. He turned to my brother Jake, beaming like he was looking at a war hero, and said, "To Jake for closing that big real estate deal, couldn't be prouder." Then he looked at Rachel and gushed, "And to Rachel, who somehow manages 3 kids a job and still bakes those incredible cookies. Wonder Woman." People clapped. I clapped too. He kept going. He thanked Ben for making progress after years of struggle. He even gave a nod to my teenage cousin for making the soccer team. And then, nothing. No glance. No smile. No mention of me at all. I was sitting right there across from him, and he looked past me like I didn't exist. It was just a few seconds, but it felt like being hit by a truck in slow motion. My heart dropped. I forced a smile, lifted my glass, and sipped like it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than I wanted it to. People noticed. My cousin Julie gave me a small, awkward smile. My mum looked down at her plate. No one said anything. No one ever does. I've been the invisible daughter for so long, it's become tradition. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room for dessert, I stayed behind. I stared at my empty plate and asked myself for the 100th time, what did I do wrong? Was it because I never married? Because I chose tech over teaching or nursing? Because I never gave him grandkids to brag about? I thought about the promotions I'd earned, the team I managed, and the app I'd launched that got featured in a national magazine. None of it mattered. Not to him. In his eyes, I was just Melissa, the one who didn't quite fit. I replayed every conversation we ever had, looking for clues. He always kept our talk short. If I mentioned work, he changed the subject. If I brought up an award or milestone, he'd nod politely, then ask if Rachel needed help with the kids. I know some people don't care what their parents think. They live their lives and don't look back. I envy them, I really do, because no matter how strong I am at work, no matter how independent I try to be, part of me still wants to hear my dad say, "I'm proud of you." Just once. That night I drove home in silence. No music. Just me and my thoughts echoing in the car. It hit me harder than I expected. I realized I couldn't keep pretending his opinion didn't matter, because it did. And the pain of being invisible in your own family. It doesn't just sting, it lingers. That was the moment something shifted. I didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of finding answers I never knew I needed. I was around 7 when I started to realize I didn't matter the same way my siblings did. It wasn't just a feeling. It was in the little things that added up moment after moment, like the way Dad never came to my school plays, but always showed up for Jake's baseball games, even when they were hours away. He'd shout from the stands, chest puffed up, yelling, "That's my boy," while I sat in my room, later trying to act like I didn't care. I remember one time I brought home a drawing I was proud of. It was a family portrait with me holding Dad's hand. He glanced at it, said, "That's nice," then tossed it on the counter without a second look. But when Rachel brought home a crayon scribble with 3 stick figures and a heart, he framed it and hung it in his office. I used to stare at that frame every time I passed his desk, wondering what it would feel like to be seen like that, wondering what I'd have to do to be worthy of a nail in the wall. On birthdays, I got presents, sure, but they felt like afterthoughts. Jake got the remote control car he begged for. Rachel got a hand-stitched quilt with her name embroidered on it. I got a $20 gift card once. The tag said, "From Mum and Dad," but it was in Mum's handwriting. I knew who remembered and who didn't. There was this one Christmas I'll never forget. We were opening gifts and Dad gave Rachel a necklace, real silver, with a tiny blue stone. He looked at her and said, "This reminded me of your eyes." Then he turned to me, handed over a sweater 2 sizes too big, and said, "Hope that fits." It didn't. I told myself it didn't matter. Those gifts didn't define love. But over time, all the small things made one big truth impossible to ignore. I wasn't his favourite. I wasn't even close. I was the quiet one, the background noise, the one who had to work twice as hard just to be tolerated. When I got straight A's, he nodded and went back to reading his paper. When Jake passed a single class, he'd failed twice. Dad took him out for burgers to celebrate. I started shrinking inside, like every inch of me that wanted attention was slowly folding into itself. By the time I hit high school, I had stopped trying. I stopped showing him report cards. I stopped telling him when I won awards. If he didn't ask, I didn't tell. It was easier to pretend I didn't care than to face the ache of being dismissed again. But I did care. I cared deeply. I just learned to bury it, to wrap that ache in silence and keep moving. What else do you do when the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally only seems to love you in theory, not in practice? I grew up wondering if something was wrong with me, if I were broken, and that doubt stayed with me for years. If my dad were the storm, my mum was the stillness after it. Quiet, soft-spoken, always smoothing over tension like it was her job to keep the peace. But in all the years I watched her see me get ignored, overlooked, dismissed, she never once stepped in. She was there for every birthday, where my gift felt like an obligation. She was there every time my dad praised my siblings in front of me and left me hanging in silence. I used to glance at her hoping she'd say something, a look, a word, anything to make it stop. But she just gave me those gentle, tired eyes, the kind that said, "I know, but not I'll fix it." I told myself maybe she was stuck too. Maybe she learned early on that speaking up made things worse. But as a child, that silence felt like betrayal. It hurt even more because I knew she loved me. I saw it in the way she packed my lunch, in the way she brushed my hair when I was sick, in the way she kissed my forehead at night. But love without voice, without action, started to feel hollow. There were moments when I almost believed she didn't notice the difference, that maybe she thought Dad treated us all the same. But then I'd catch her watching me, lips pressed, tight hands ringing in her lap. She knew. She saw it all, and still she said nothing. Once when I was about 12, I asked her, "Why does Dad treat Jake better than me?" She looked like I'd just asked her to lift a mountain. She hesitated, then said, "Your father has a lot on his mind." That was it. No defense, no comfort, just a soft excuse that felt like salt in a wound. I never asked again. As I got older, I stopped expecting her to protect me. I stopped hoping for a moment where she'd finally raise her voice or tell him to see me. The ache of that hope fading was its own kind of grief, like mourning someone who was still alive but would never be who you needed them to be. Now when I look back, I wonder if she thought her silence was love, if she believed staying calm was a way of keeping us safe. But what I needed wasn't calm. I needed a witness. I needed someone to stand beside me to say, "You're not imagining this. You deserve better." She never said that. Not once. And because of that, I spent a lifetime feeling like I had no one in my corner, no ally in the very house where I was supposed to feel safest. That loneliness ran deeper than any insult my father ever threw my way, because at least his disregard was clear. Her silence was wrapped in tenderness, and somehow that made it hurt even more. It was my dad's 65th birthday. My mum had planned this huge backyard party with string lights, a catered buffet, and a rented tent in case it rained. All 4 of us kids were there, plus aunts, uncles, cousins, and neighbours he'd known since before I was born. People were everywhere, balancing plates of food and plastic cups filled with wine or lemonade. Laughter floated through the air, and the playlist was full of old rock songs he loved. I stood near the grill, trying to act normal, making small talk with my cousin about tech layoffs, and pretending I wasn't dreading the part I knew was coming. After dinner, once everyone was seated, and dessert plates were cleared, my dad clinked his fork against his glass. The crowd quieted down fast. This was his favourite part, standing in front of a crowd, with a drink in his hand, soaking up attention like it was oxygen. He smiled, eyes scanning the tables, then held up his glass. "I just want to say how lucky I am," he began, pausing for effect. "Not everyone gets to sit surrounded by family like this. I'm proud of what I've built, and I'm proud of my kids." My stomach tightened. To Jake, he said, turning toward my brother, who's been killing it in real estate. I knew from the beginning that boy had hustle. Jake gave a smug little nod and raised his glass. To Rachel, he continued for being a rock star mum and somehow still finding time to run her Etsy shop. "I don't know how you do it." She blushed and people clapped. I clapped too slowly. And Ben, he said, "You've had a tough few years, but I see you trying, and that means a lot." Ben looked down, probably embarrassed, but he smiled a little. Then Dad paused, just long enough that it was clear something was missing. He looked around the table. Eyes passed right over me like I wasn't sitting there at all. Then he raised his glass and added, "To all my kids who've made me proud." That was it. That was the moment. I felt the heat rise in my chest, like someone had flipped a switch inside me. My face was frozen in this half smile that felt like it didn't belong to me. My heart was racing, but my body didn't move. I sat there, wine glass in hand, pretending everything was fine, while inside I was cracking open. Nobody said anything. Nobody looked shocked. It was like they expected it. I looked around, waiting for someone to notice, for someone to say, "Wait, what about Melissa?" But all I saw were lowered eyes and awkward smiles. My mum glanced at me and quickly looked away. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to flip the table, throw my drink and scream. But instead, I nodded like I agreed. Like I wasn't just publicly erased by the man whose approval I had spent my whole life chasing. I don't know how long I sat there after his toast. I remember someone cutting the cake, someone handing out slices, and me holding mine, but not tasting a bite. I just kept thinking over and over, "You're not proud of me? You never were." I thought about the time I paid off my student loans on my own, the hours I poured into launching my first app, and the mentorship program I'd built for women in tech. None of that mattered. Not to him. I didn't fit his mold of what a daughter should be, so in his world, I didn't count. Later, after most people had left, and my siblings were helping clean up, I walked inside to find some quiet. I stood in the hallway, looking at the family photos on the wall. Jake is in his graduation gown. Rachel is holding her first baby. Ben is holding a football. And then me, barely visible in a blurry group shot from 10 years ago. That's how it felt. Always on the edge. Always out of focus. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted to walk right up to him and demand an answer. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew what he'd say. Nothing. Or worse, he'd act like I was being dramatic. Like I was inventing wounds just to get attention. So I left quietly. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't thank him for the party. I got in my car, shut the door, and let the silence swallow me whole. That drive home felt endless. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they needed to, and I kept blinking hard, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. But they came anyway. And with them came something else. Not just sadness. Not just shame. A slow, burning fury. One that had been buried for years, but was finally waking up. Because this wasn't just about being overlooked. This was about being erased. And I wasn't going to let it happen again. When I got home from the party, I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in the entryway for a long time, keys still in my hand, heart still thudding with everything I hadn't said. There was something heavy sitting on my chest, something I couldn't name, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed shoes, still on. My room felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. I kept replaying my father's voice in my head, that smug little toast. My fingers dug into the comforter, and before I could talk myself out of it, I stood up and walked toward the closet. There was a drawer in the hallway chest I hadn't opened in years. It held random papers, old letters, things from college, and a few photos. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't sit still anymore. My hands moved through envelopes and folders like they had a purpose of their own. Then I found it. A small blue box I didn't recognize. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Most were addressed to my mum from her mother, my grandmother, who passed when I was in high school. I hadn't thought of her in years. She was kind, sharp-tongued, and always called things as she saw them. My heart started beating faster as I untied the ribbon. Most of the letters were everyday stuff. Recipes updates about her garden and little complaints about the neighbours. But one of them felt different. It wasn't dated. It didn't even have a greeting. Just a few lines scribbled in shaky handwriting. "You've carried this long enough. He made his choice, but she is still your daughter. Don't let his silence turn you into a stranger to your own child. Blood isn't the only bond that matters." I read it 3 times. My hands were sweating. My breath felt shallow. Who was she talking about? I looked at the handwriting again, then the envelope. No stamp. This was never mailed. Just tucked away, buried like it was too dangerous to be read. The letter wasn't long, but every word hung heavy. He made his choice. She is still your daughter. The message was clear, even if it didn't say it outright. Someone had chosen to keep something buried, and it had to do with me. I sat on the floor, the letter in my lap, and tried to think of anything from my past that might connect the dots. The favoritism, the silence, the strange way my father looked at me like he didn't fully see me. I'd ignored it for so long. Now I couldn't unsee it. That letter was the first crack in the wall. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Something was off, and I was going to find out what it was. The DNA results came on a Wednesday morning. I had the email sitting in my inbox for hours before I clicked it. My hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from that feeling you get when you know life is about to split in 2. The screen loaded, and I scanned for the key line. It didn't take long. Possible paternal match, no direct relation found. I stared at the words, willing them to make sense. Then I read it again out loud this time, like that might change the meaning. But it didn't. Richard was not my biological father. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there frozen like my brain was trying to reboot itself. Then the pieces started shifting. The toast, the years of coldness, the quiet resentment I could never name. All of it suddenly made sense. And that's when the tears came. Not loud or dramatic, just silent and steady, like something had finally broken loose inside me. Not just sadness, not just shock. It was grief mixed with relief. A strange, terrible kind of clarity. I waited until evening to call my mum. I didn't want to do it over the phone, but I couldn't wait another day. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice cheerful, like she didn't have a clue what was coming. I asked if I could come over and said it was important. She met me at the door, wearing her usual cardigan, smiling softly, like she always did. I walked in without saying much, went straight to the kitchen table, and pulled out the printed test results from my bag. I slid them across the table. She read them slowly, her face draining of colour. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the paper down. Then she looked at me and didn't say a word. "You knew," I said. My voice was calm, but my heart was pounding. She nodded, eyes filling with tears. "I always meant to tell you," she whispered, but I was afraid. For 30 years I asked. I didn't raise my voice, but every syllable cut through the air like glass. Afraid of what, that I'd stop loving you, that I'd hate him even more. She shook her head. Afraid of what it would do to you. Afraid you'd think you didn't belong. I leaned back in my chair, trying to breathe. I already felt like I didn't belong. My whole life. She cried then. Real tears. The kind that comes from guilt, not grief. I didn't hug her. I didn't reach across the table. I just sat there, letting the truth settle between us like smoke after a fire. I wasn't who I thought I was, but somehow that knowledge didn't destroy me. It grounded me. For the first time, I understood the silence, the distance, the absence of pride. It wasn't about me being a disappointment. It was about me being a reminder, and that changed everything. The next family gathering was smaller, just a Sunday lunch for my dad's birthday. Nothing fancy this time. A potluck, paper plates, cousins, wrangling toddlers, the kind of noise that made the house feel crowded, even if no one said much. But I wasn't there for cake. I came with a purpose. I parked at the curb, stared at the house for a few seconds, and reached across the seat for the envelope. It was simple. No name, no decoration, just the DNA results folded once and sealed tight. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and stepped out into the warm afternoon air. Inside the kitchen smelled like baked ham and garlic bread. My mum greeted me with a hug, her face a mixture of nerves and forced calm. I returned the hug, not because I felt better, but because I was no longer angry. I had moved past that. Now it was clear. A steady kind of peace that comes when the fog finally lifts. I saw him at the table, already sipping beer and laughing with Jake about the latest housing market trend. He didn't look at me when I walked in, didn't stop his sentence. Just a glance, then back to his plate. That was fine. I didn't come for recognition. I came for closure. After everyone had filled their plates and sat down, I stood up. No clinking glass, no raised voice. Just me, steady and clear. "I have something for you," I said, pulling the envelope from my pocket. He blinked, confused. "What's this?" "Just something you should have known a long time ago," I said, setting the envelope in front of him. "Happy birthday." The room went quiet. He opened it slowly. At first his eyes narrowed like he couldn't quite process what he was reading. Then his face froze. One long, stunned breath. "I'm not your daughter," I said, calm as ever. "At least not by blood. Turns out you were right all along." He didn't speak. No denial, no confusion. Just silence. "You never made me feel like I was yours," I continued. "So I guess it fits. But here's the thing. I don't need to belong to you anymore. I never did." My siblings looked stunned. My mum had tears in her eyes. I didn't look at her. "For years I twisted myself into knots, trying to earn a place in this family," I said. "And I thought maybe if I just worked harder, or stayed quieter, or did more, you'd see me. But I realize now I could have cured cancer, and you still wouldn't have looked up." He finally opened his mouth. "Melissa?" But I shook my head. "No. You don't get to say anything. Not today." I reached into my purse, pulled out a set of car keys, and placed them next to the envelope. "Remember the car I gave you when yours broke down 2 years ago? Consider it a gift from someone who used to think you were worth it." Then I turned and walked toward the door. No tears. No hesitation. I heard Rachel whisper something behind me, but I didn't stop. I walked straight to the driveway, opened the driver's side door, and slid in. The car I'd bought him was right there, parked in front of mine. I opened the glove box, grabbed the registration and title, and left the keys on the seat. As I pulled away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. I felt like someone who had finally stepped out of a cage, slammed the door, and walked into the world on her own terms. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger. It was freedom. A long time coming. And it felt better than I ever imagined. It's been a year since that day. A year since I walked away from a family that never really saw me, and somehow I've never felt more at peace. I thought losing them would leave a hole, but what I lost wasn't love. It was weight. The kind you carry so long, you forget it's not supposed to be there. In the months that followed, I started building something new. It didn't happen all at once. It started with small moments. A coworker who noticed when I seemed off. A neighbour left soup at my door when I had the flu. A friend who listened without trying to fix me. They weren't blood, but they showed up. They remembered my birthday. They asked how my day was and actually waited for the answer. They made room for me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That's what family is. It's not about DNA or matching last names. It's about how people make you feel in their presence. Safe, valued, seen. And I learned that you don't have to beg for that kind of love. You just have to stop wasting yourself where it doesn't exist. There are still days when the past creeps in. When I see a father and daughter laughing at a cafe, or hear someone talk about Sunday dinners with their parents. But the ache is softer now. Less like a wound and more like a scar. Something that reminds me how far I've come. I used to think belonging was something you earned. That if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, and achieved more, I could finally become enough. But the truth is, the right people won't need convincing. They'll love you for exactly who you are. I wish someone had told me that sooner. It's okay to walk away from people who can't love you well. That letting go doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you've finally chosen yourself. Now my life looks different. Quieter in some ways, but fuller, more honest, more free. I have a small circle of people who remind me every day what it feels like to be respected, not tolerated, to be cared for, not controlled. And that to me is family. So if you're out there holding on to a version of love that leaves you empty, I hope you find the courage to let go, to start fresh, to believe you deserve more. Because you do. And sometimes the real family we need isn't the one we're born into. It's the one we create one choice, one boundary, one brave moment at a time.